This is Obsidian ASMR. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for future videos. Surprise! Welcome to my final, absolutely final World of Warcraft video for now. And this is entirely a retrospective, rather than talking you through the expansions that we've discussed before, because we're up to date now. I have this final box set, which, as you can probably tell, is pretty large, but it is also in commemoration of World of Warcraft's 15th anniversary, which was in 2019, which means in 2024 it will be the game's 20th anniversary, and it's still going strong and keeps pulling me back. So, because of the size of the box, I'm going to have to switch up a couple of angles for you. But I felt like you need to see the initial logo. So let me move this and we'll get on with it. So on the one side of the box, you have this alabaster image of an orc, an indiscriminate orc. I don't think it is Gorel or Juratan or Orgrim Doomhammer or anybody really that we know. Sourfang, nobody like that. I just think it is an orc. And on the other side, we have a night elf. Again, in kind of a marble alabaster style. And that is the beauty of this box. It's very ornate. It's very special. It's one of the proudest elements of my collection, even if it is a little bit dirty. So let's see what's inside. Now, isn't this far more familiar? One of these massive tomes. And this is the first part of the box, and honestly, it's quite light. And we'll see why in a second. But again, you've got the nice ornate logo, the 15-year anniversary, and the gold embossing. You've got that marble, night elf, and orc, as well as a griffin and an unnamed dwarf, all there. But the most striking thing is the dark portal at the top. That's where my eye always goes to. this is why it is so light. Because what this does give you is some fine art prints, which we'll talk about in a second, as well as a mouse mat that included the world as we knew it, Azeroth, Outland, and Draenor. And they did have Northrend, some isles there, which would be the Broken Isles, the Maelstrom, but you can't really see Pandaria. Obviously that's Kalimdor, that's the Eastern Kingdoms. Very big, this mouse mat, but it's not the size, it's how you use it. Then you got this Onyxia pin. If you can see that. Again, I'm not really one for these big pins, but there she is, Onyxia. And in here, you did have the download code for the alabaster mounts that you could get. I don't think you can get them anymore. But the star of our show, for now at least, are these fine art prints. So as an overview, I'll take these out of here as an overview. You get 8 of them, all from, at the time, the 8 installments of the game that we love. So you get Who's That? We'll find out in a minute. Ragnaros. There you go, I told you. What looks like a Dreadlord for the Burning Crusade, but it's probably more likely Illidan. Wrath of the Lich King. You've got Arthas as the Lich King. Cataclysm. Deathwing the Destroyer. A Pandaren monk, obviously. Garrosh. Hellscream for Warlords of Draenor. Illidan, again, for Legion. And then Sylvanas and Anduin in battle for Azeroth. Let's take a look at these. They're just paper, these. But yeah, the detail on them is quite stunning. Although this isn't my favourite. As I say, they came back to play during the Legion phase. Really, it was between the Warlords of Draenor and Legion where I really kind of rediscovered my love for the lore after it had been somewhat dampened by Mists of Pandaria, and honestly Cataclysm as well. I'm more appreciative of the story elements that came through in Cataclysm now, in retrospect, like the Earthen Ring, Magni Bronzebeard, and what they were setting up with Azeroth actually being a character rather than just a planet. Spoilers. But at the time, I don't think anybody really, apart from the real hardcore lore masters, shall we say, cottoned on to what was happening and how it all tied in with the Titans, who are viewed as the new gods, and were worshipped. But the end of Legion kind of showed us that they're not necessarily forces for good. They're not necessarily forces for evil. They're just entities with their own wants, desires, and machinations. And I like that. Because again, it's nuance. Nothing is purely good. Nothing is purely evil. We're all shades of grey. And this is embodied pictorially here by Illidan Stormrage. Widely misunderstood by his peers, by his brother, by his love interest, but ultimately vindicated in his hunt to stop the fallen titan, Sargeras. Illidan is a cornerstone of this franchise. I've known the name since 2007. And he still looms large over the story to this day, as he watches and waits forever to see if Sargeras ever breaks his bonds. So this is obviously Alexstrasza and Deathwing, Neltharion, two of the dragon aspects, but one unrecognizable through his warping and subjugation by the old gods, driven literally mad in his efforts to, as he saw it, protect the Dragon Isles and Azeroth as charged by Tyr. But, as we've seen in some of his scribblings in Neltharis, he'd begun to doubt buys in to Sargeras's lust for Azeroth and the Titan within. The last Titan, some would say. Garrosh, Hellscream. Often a forgotten character these days, having been overshadowed by Sylvanas Windrunner in recent times. Garrosh was cruel, hardened through the loss of his father, Grommash Hellscream, and was flung into the role of war chief of the Horde before he was really equipped to deal with it. That heavy mantle. Young, brash, a chip on his shoulder. Garrosh was too insecure to lead. And ultimately, that was his undoing. I'll never forget the cutscene where Garrosh and Goel, as I like to call him, Thrall, as other people call him, faced off in, I think it was Nagrand, for the final time in a Mughra, where, that's like the orc honourable fight to the death. And just as Thrall was about to win, using his elemental abilities that he'd attuned himself to, Garrosh defiantly and also quite sadly exclaimed, "I am what you made me." And I always interpreted that, even after Thrall said, "No, you made yourself what you are," or words to the effect of that. I always felt sad for Garrosh. Again, he was very clearly insecure, and I think that led to a lot of his aggression, and he just needed a teacher, guidance, and somebody to temper that anger that he had within him. He was young, petulant, and easily exploited by the Shahs of Pandaria. And then once he'd become this great pariah, really all he had left was to try to make good the, how do you want to put it, perceived wrongs of the past. mystic force of Warlords of Draenor, mostly, without the Frostwolf clan. But it turns out that even they were being misled by Archimonde and Gul'dan, but from a different timeline. So it's interesting how things can change, but things stay the same. Yeah. And here is my boy, Arthas. This was the pinnacle of the game, in my opinion. And the reason why I say that is you've got to bear in mind the context coming into World of Warcraft, where you'd had Warcraft 3 and the two main stories revolved around Arthas and Illidan. And it wasn't until the expansion, the Frozen Throne, where those two faced up against one another, and Arthas came out on top, claiming the power of the Lich King with the use of the rune blade Frostmourne, which you can see there, and bested Illidan. Why is that relevant? Well, if you cast your mind back, the original game, without any of the expansions, didn't have Illidan or Arthas. All it had was, Onyxia, Ragnaros, Blackwing Lair, all that kind of stuff, which was great. But in terms of the heavy lore, it didn't have any kind of Burning Legion presence until until the Burning Crusade, and then with Wrath of the Lich King, you were basically you'd beaten those raid bosses. You'd gone to Outland, you'd defeated Illidan, and then you're gonna go face the guy that beat Illidan. So in a lot of ways, this was the pinnacle of the story. I would also say that Northrend, the Frozen Wastes, is often viewed as one of the most important areas of Azeroth and the Warcraft lore. It again saw its relevance in Shadowlands, acting as the portal into the afterlife. But more importantly, my understanding is it will be the setting once again for an expansion in the World Soul saga. I believe it will be either the Last Titan or the final expansion, not makes sense, partly because, you know, all of that Titan equipment that is buried under the ground there, but also just it has a nice circular moment to it because, you know, the aspects in Deathwing, they were mentioned in previous Warcraft games, specifically Warcraft 2, but the majority of the fan base, I mean, if you try and get a copy of Warcraft 1 or Warcraft 2, I think you'd be lucky. They're very rare. They haven't been remastered or anything, so a lot of this, you know, just isn't talked about. And you have to really know the background, like, you know, Gul'dan died in the Tomb of Sargeras, which is where Illidan went to get his skull in Warcraft 3, not Warcraft 2. Obviously, you meet characters in the first couple of games like Anduin Lothar, who was depicted in the film. Aegwynn, Sargeras, in the second one, I think. Medivh, all those characters that cast a large shadow over the Warcraft mythology, but they're not really present, you know, and it's more of a cameo appearance when they do show up. But I could talk about that all day. Now, I got this completely wrong. This is Kael'thas, Sunstrider, and Kil'jaeden, the Deceiver. Obviously, Kil'jaeden was one of the fallen prophets of Argus, alongside Archimonde and the prophet Velen, who is still on the side of the light. The other two were tempted into joining the dark side, for want of a better phrase, by Sargeras, and to join the Burning Legion as his henchmen. Always right and left-hand men. We've defeated Archimonde twice. In Warcraft 3, when he tries to burn down the World Tree, Teldrassil. And then, or it might have been another tree before Teldrassil. I can't quite remember. And then, at the end of Warlords of Draenor, in Hellfire Citadel, he is the final boss of that raid. Kil'jaeden we defeat at the Sunwell in the Burning Crusade, and then again in Legion, where we ultimately do kill him, and it opens up the portal to Argus. But with the Sunwell, it's more like a temporary defeat, and he'll be back, kind of thing. But he wanted to corrupt the Sunwell in order to harness the arcane energy or power that it produces, I think. Which is very similar to the Night Well and the Moon Well, all these kind of things. Kael'thas, of course, was the crown prince of Quel'Thalas, the home of the Blood Elves. But he had a Kel'Thas was actually brought up alongside Jaina Proudmoore and Arthas Menethil. And if you read the book Rise of the Lich King, Arthas, there are scenes at Dalaran between the three of them where Kel'Thas and Arthas were in a bit of a love triangle, competing with one another for Jaina Proudmoore. Kel'Thas obviously got corrupted by the allure of Kil'jaeden, and then we defeated him in the Tempest Keep raid in the Burning Crusade, and then he shows up again at the Sunwell, I think, and then my understanding is he appears again in Shadowlands, along with other characters like Uther the Lightbringer, but I don't think he gets much time. But still, I've always mained a Blood Elf. I'm one of those people. So, I always like to see Kel'Thas. Then we'll leave that one for last, and we'll talk about Sylvanas and Anduin. Very, very interesting, this imagery, knowing what we do now. Of course, Sylvanas, the Banshee Queen, former Ranger General of Silvermoon, until Arthas severed her soul from her body and turned her into a banshee as she defended her people and her city, who then obviously turned her away or turned their backs on her because she'd become part of the Scourge or the undead. So she found her way to the Undercity and became their queen. Helped forge a new peoples, scarred forever by the actions of Arthas Menethil. And that has always loomed over her. And she's never really come to terms with that, even after the defeat of the Lich King. Well, Anduin becomes a bit of a tragic figure, having been the pillar of optimism and goodwill within the Warcraft mythology for at least 2 or 3 expansions since the death of his father Varian. But we didn't really see Anduin in Dragonflight, because in Shadowlands he was brainwashed and controlled by the jailer with the help of Sylvanas, ironically, to turn him into a sort of Lich King Part 2. And again, that's really interesting, that parallel, because Anduin is a paladin, a very promising paladin. I believe he was never part of the Argent Dawn or the Argent Crusade. lost city that has now become the tomb above the Undercity. And quite like Arthas, Anduin was corrupted, at least temporarily, to serve the jailer, and his mission to control the soul of Azeroth and the Maw, which is basically where, like, evil souls went for penitence. Anduin is saved, thankfully, and he doesn't go down the same route of Arthas, thanks to the memories of his father, Varian, and also the Orc General, Sourfang, who he struck up a close relationship with during battle for Azeroth. Sylvanas, having finally, well, she did some horrible things. She burnt an entire city and the World Tree, Teldrassil, committing atrocities against the Night Elves, and in the process killing millions. She struck a deal with the jailer in order to deliver Anduin and work with him so that she never ended up in the Maw. But ultimately, she saw the error of her ways, and her soul was reunited with her body. And she fought alongside us at the end of the Shadowlands. Against the jailer, and then was forced into the Maw as a penitence to save as many souls as she could. In fact, all the souls that she'd harmed in her undeath, which is where she remains to this day. I don't remember everything because I didn't play much of Shadowlands, but I think that's roughly the gist of what went on. Won't lie, I feel Sylvanas was a lot like Garrosh, and they kind of ruined her character. Took it a little bit too far. Anduin, on the other hand, I'm interested to see how this plays out, because the one character that they haven't brought back yet, or seemingly brought back, was Arthas. But I think the scope, because what I forgot to mention was, in order to dominate Anduin, the jailer used either part of or the remnants of Arthas' soul in the sword that he gave to Anduin. And then you see kind of like Arthas' soul dissipate into nothing, or part of it at least, after Anduin is freed. But there is some skepticism in me that thinks we'll see Arthas again, probably haunting Anduin kind of stuff. Interesting. And then finally, we've got this guy. The very, very iconic elemental final boss of World of Warcraft, Vanilla, Ragnaros. I think he has quite a substantial impact on the lore, although I don't know much about it, so I'm not going to comment. But what I can say is, clearly, he influenced the Firelands raid, obviously Farak, in Dragonflight. Yeah. And he's been one of the most iconic villains, or bosses, the game has ever put out. And with that, we'll move on to the final thing that is in this box, and what makes it the heaviest. So, bear with me. Here he is, Ragnaros. He is heavy. Quite heavy. But isn't he awesome? I think so. It's one of those things that I want to put on display. But my partner isn't really into World of Warcraft the same way that I am. So she probably wouldn't say yes. Unless I got comments to tell her that, she should let me. Because it sits like that. And you wonder, how did this come in the box? Well, these bits, you see here, they come off. So does this hammer, and so does this hand. But there is a lot of weight to this. It's beautiful, masterfully crafted. So, thank you for tuning in and spending your time with me, listening to me ramble about World of Warcraft. Again, if you enjoyed it, make sure to give me a thumbs up. And tell me in the comment section if you want more of these videos, or if you want any other versions of videos, ASMR collections for triggers, roleplays, you name it. Let me know. I'd be really, really happy to hear from you. And otherwise, if you did like the video, maybe consider hitting the subscribe button and joining the 847 at the time of recording as we march as a community closer and closer towards that big 1,000 milestone, which is crazy. It's so close. I do have a surprise for you all if I hit that milestone, because I'm sure, without giving too much away, you're sick of just seeing my hands. But got to get to the 1,000 mark to see what happens. So it's all up to you. With all that being said, I hope you have a wonderful week, month, and festive